Donald Trump and his attorneys were sanctioned $1 million.
$1 million.
The attorneys had a bad week. In fact, they had the mother of all bad weeks when a federal judge fined them and their client $938,000 on top of $66,000 in prior fines, blasting them for filing an endless barrage of garbage lawsuits as part of, quote, a continuing pattern of misuse of the courts, which, quote, undermines the rule of law. Basically, they filed some bad filings and found out. And along the way, the court called them out for being really crappy lawyers, lamenting that our current laws are incapable of handling people who are just bad at their jobs. Now, generally, that's not something that you come back from. That's something that sends you to an ashram for a month for silent contemplation to think about where it all went wrong and how you can ever face the world again. Or it would if you were a normal lawyer, but like their client, Donald Trump's attorneys are immune from shame, and that's a pretty handy skill.
You know what, Alina? You're not gonna win. You can't win.
So how did we get here? Well, in March of 2022, Donald Trump sued Hillary Clinton, the Clinton campaign, the Democratic National Committee, former FBI Director James Comey, and 24 other parties from the Kraken cinematic universe.
We kept adding defendants. You couldn't stop adding defendants.
Trump demanded $72 million in damages to his reputation and legal fees that he incurred during the Mueller investigation of his campaign's ties to Russia. Trump was represented in this case by his now regular attorney, Alina Habba, who went from general counsel from a parking garage company to an attack dog for the former president in just a few short years.
We have to fight.
She was joined by Peter Tickton, a Florida insurance lawyer whose claim to fame is that he was Trump's roommate 60 years ago in a junior military academy, where he helped Trump secure the, quote, Ladies' Man Yearbook Award. The day after the suit was filed, Habba went on Sean Hannity's show promising to avenge Trump for the great injustice of the Mueller investigation, a crime allegedly perpetrated by Hillary Clinton and the DNC.
If you are going to make up lies, if you are going to try and take him down, he's going to fight you back.
She followed up with a Newsmax hit where she promised that by suing Hillary Clinton, Trump was defending democracy itself.
But what the real goal is democracy.
Now put a pin in those interviews because we'll come back to those later. Now, according to Rule 8 of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, a complaint should consist of, quote, a short and plain statement of the claim showing that the pleader is entitled to relief. Basically, you tell the court what happened, what laws were broken, and what you want the court to do about that. This complaint was not that. Instead, Trump's lawyer spent 108 pages screaming that Hillary Clinton and the vast network of Democratic operatives engaged in, quote, an unthinkable plot, one that shocks the conscience and is of an affront to this nation's democracy. The defendants responded in April with motions to dismiss, pointing out the many problems with that particular complaint. This put Trump and his lawyers on notice that their case was hopelessly defective, or in layman's terms, hot garbage. But instead of fixing it, they 85 pages of ranting and several other even crazier legal theories. U.S. District Judge Donald Middlebrooks was not impressed, saying, quote, to say that plaintiff's 193-page, 819-paragraph amended complaint is excessive in length would be putting things mildly. The theory was that Clinton maliciously conspired with the deep state FBI, including supposed Clinton loyalist James Comey, to gin up the FBI's Crossfire Hurricane investigation into the Trump campaign's Russia ties, which is quite the leap considering that Comey never revealed the ongoing FBI investigation of the Trump campaign, but did make public comments about the Clinton email inquiry in late October, which some people think cost her the 2016 election. Now, Trump also blamed Clinton and her minions for the Mueller investigation, even though Trump's Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein was the one who appointed Special Counsel Robert Mueller. And yes, Trump sued Rosenstein, along with everyone else, accusing him of participating in a scheme, quote, so outrageous, subversive, and incendiary that even the events of Watergate pale in comparison. So the complaint was long on hyper-caffeinated rhetoric and disastrously short on law. It also played pretty fast and loose with the facts themselves. But most glaringly, it implied that the FBI's Russia investigation was the result of a scheme, quote, conceived, coordinated, and carried out by top-level officials at the Clinton campaign and the DNC, including the candidate herself, who attempted to shield her involvement behind a wall of third parties. The pleading cited the Justice Department's Inspector General's report, which absolutely said nothing of the kind. In fact, the report found that the inquiry was opened after a low-level Trump campaign operative named George Papadopoulos, the infamous coffee boy, got drunk and blabbed to an Australian diplomat that Russian operatives were going to start releasing hacked materials to harm the Clinton campaign, which they did, strategically dumping stolen emails from the campaign and the DNC using WikiLeaks as frontman. Now, instead, the complaint suggested that Trump came under the investigation after a Democratic attorney named Michael Sussman tipped off the FBI about suspicious internet traffic between the server in Trump Tower and a sanctioned Russian bank.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing.
In reality, the Crossfire Hurricane investigation was opened in July of 2016, months before Sussman showed up at the FBI in September. And among other things, Trump also blamed Hillary Clinton for getting him kicked off of Twitter in January of 2021. But the factual problems with his complaint paled in comparison to the myriad legal deficiencies. In his order dismissing the case, Judge Middlebrooks highlighted the, quote, audacity of plaintiff's legal theories and the manner in which they clearly contravene binding case law, which is judge speak for this complaint is not just hot garbage, but basically judicial napalm. Now, first, the suit was filed in Florida, where none of the defendants reside. You can't just sue anyone in any court. The parties have to have some connection to the place where the case is heard to establish what's called personal jurisdiction. Trump's lawyers made the novel argument that the defendants, quote, knew that Florida is a state in the United States, which was an important one, and thus, I guess, could be hauled into court in the Sunshine State because they knew it was a state. I don't know. Now, second, the statute of limitations for all the conduct allegedly had already passed by the time that Trump and his lawyers got around to filing this complaint. And as the defendants pointed out in their motion to dismiss, Trump's supposed injuries took place in 2016 and 2017, and thanks to his constant tweeting, he was well aware of them at the time. Quote, notwithstanding his rousing all caps call to action, plaintiff waited 4 years, 4 months, and 24 days before filing suit, and that made him way too late to file. But mostly the suit failed because Trump's claims were nuts. He alleged that Clinton and her goons violated the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act in a conspiracy to derail his political ambitions. Yes, they claimed it was RICO, and of course, it's never ever RICO. But okay, let's pretend for a minute that we're living in some alternate universe where it could be RICO, a world Trump would dearly love to be in, since it means triple damages for the plaintiff. Trump would have to point to a specific criminal action known as a predicate to establish the conspiracy. Trump's predicate was the theft of trade secrets. His theory was that the DNS lookup data, which Democratic lawyer Michael Sussman reported to the FBI, was proprietary information stolen from the Trump organization. Except that DNS data is public information that can't be stolen because it's not secret, much less a trade secret. And without the RICO, the whole lawsuit fell apart pretty quickly, not that it wasn't already. There was no predicate for any of the tortious conduct alleged, or tortuous, as Trump's lawyers wrote it 10 times in both their first and second complaints. Trump's lawyers also managed to embarrass themselves in a variety of creative ways. For instance, they repeatedly described defendant Charles Dolan Jr. as a resident of New York, even after Dolan sent them an affidavit saying that he lived in Virginia. When called out on the air, they insisted that they'd done their due diligence as lawyers because there are lots of people named Dolan living in the state of New York. And if you're a lawyer who finds yourself having to make this argument, you've probably already lost. In an attempt to get their case in front of Trump-appointed Judge Eileen Cannon, his lawyers first filed the case in Fort Pierce, Florida. You might recall that Judge Cannon later went on to do a whole bunch of favors for Trump when the FBI seized a massive cache of classified documents at his home at Mar-a-Lago, all to have that undone by 3 conservative judges on the 11th Circuit. But the gambit to get the RICO suit in front of her failed, and they wound up in front of Judge Middlebrooks, who was appointed to the bench in 1997 by Bill Clinton. And instead of taking their lumps, they filed an ill-conceived motion to get him to disqualify himself for what they described as, quote, prejudice so virulent or pervasive as to constitute bias against the party. Judge Middlebrooks declined to recuse himself, having had no contact with anyone named Clinton in 20 years. And it didn't get better from there, with Trump's lawyers drafting a rebuke from the court for putting the home addresses of public figures like Comey and Rosenstein on the public docket so many times it appeared to be not an accident. And in April, the defense filed motions to dismiss the case. This required each of the dozens of people that Trump said were in on the RICO to hire lawyers in Florida to read this wild complaint, research the claims, draft a pleading explaining why the case was nonsense, and generally litigate the case. Now, that was a tremendously expensive undertaking. And in June, after Trump filed an amended complaint that was even crazier than the first one, they had to do it all over again. But unlike Donald Trump, who can raise money from his supporters to pay his lawyers, the defendants were each on the hook personally for tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars for legal fees, even though they went on to win the case. That's the general rule in the United States. Even if you win, you still have to pay your own attorneys. But in September, Judge Middlebrooks issued a blistering opinion dismissing Trump's RICO lawsuit. He wrote, quote, at its core, the problem with plaintiff's amended complaint is that plaintiff is not attempting to seek redress for any legal harm. Instead, he is seeking to flaunt a 200-page political manifesto outlining his grievances against those that have opposed him, and this court is not the appropriate forum. Noting that Trump's lawyers had been disingenuous about the conclusions of the Justice Department's report on the origins of the Russia investigation, he remarked, quote, "Plaintiff and his lawyers are of course free to reject the conclusions of the Inspector General, but they cannot misrepresent it in a pleading." And the court found that the statute of limitations had already expired on Trump's RICO claim, but quote, "Even if plaintiff's RICO claims were timely, they still fail on the merits at every step of the analysis." Judge Middlebrooks ended his dismissal order with the ominous line, quote, "I reserve jurisdiction to adjudicate issues pertaining to sanctions," which is judge speak for please file a motion asking for sanctions. Trump's lawyer, Alina Habba, reacted to the dismissal in her usual fashion. She ran to Fox News to whine about all the unfairness of it all. Now, is it wise to go on national television to talk smack about the judge presiding over your case? In a word, no. But that didn't stop Habba from complaining to Sean Hannity that it was a, quote, sad day, and she was trying hard not to lose faith in the justice system.
Not only do we get dismissed, he says that this is not the proper place for recourse for Donald Trump. He has no legal ramifications. Well, what is the proper place for him?
Now, admitting on national television that you brought the case against the express wishes of your own client is, well, that's definitely a choice.
The former president looked at me and he told me, you know what, Alina? You're not going to win. You can't win. Just get rid of it. Don't do the case. And I said, no, we have to fight. It's not right what happened.
Particularly when you know that the court has all but invited the people you dragged down to Florida for a junk lawsuit to file a sanctions motion against you. And it didn't take long for Dolan, the guy who really lived in Virginia, to request sanctions against Trump and his lawyers. Now, not only had the plaintiff screwed up his address, but they'd also falsely claimed that he was, quote, a former chairman of the DNC and an active participant in a criminal conspiracy. Dolan argued, quote, "Large and small matters are falsely and cavalierly presented in plaintiff's pleadings. Any one of these false statements is grounds for sanction," adding his resume is, quote, "available online and could have been easily checked." Now, Dolan sought sanctions under Rule 11 of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. To get Rule 11 sanctions, you have to send what's known as a Rule 11 safe harbor letter to opposing counsel saying essentially, your case is terrible, I'm putting you on notice that I intend to ask the court to penalize you for filing it. And the recipient then has 21 days to withdraw the complaint without penalty. And no matter how outlandish the filing, you can still walk away without getting sanctioned, but that's not what Donald Trump or his lawyers did. The rule is meant to deter junk lawsuits by punishing parties who file pleadings with no reasonable basis, based on a legal theory that has no reasonable chance of success, or which are filed in bad faith for an improper purpose. Judge Middlebrooks found that, quote, "Here all three are true," tearing into Trump and his lawyers for their, quote, "deliberate use of the judicial system to pursue a political agenda." He described the complaint as, quote, "political grievances masquerading as legal claims," and warned that, quote, "the rule of law is undermined by the toxic combination of political fundraising with legal fees paid by political action committees, reckless and factually untrue statements by lawyers at rallies and in the media, and efforts to advance a political narrative through lawsuits without a factual basis or any cognizable legal theory." The judge fined Trump's lawyers $50,000 and made them personally responsible for another $16,000 of Dolan's fees and costs. He also suggested that the attorneys should face discipline from their local bar associations for abuse of the legal system. Now, with dozens of other defendants signaling their intent to seek normal sanctions against Trump and his legal team, Judge Middlebrooks' order was a flashing red warning light that something very bad was about to happen. And just a few days ago, Judge Middlebrooks dropped the hammer, ordering Trump and his lawyers to fork over another $938,000 in legal fees to the defendants he dragged down to Florida for this pointless exercise. And it was clear from the first sentence that Judge Middlebrooks was absolutely furious. Quote, "This case should never have been brought. Its inadequacy as a legal claim was evident from the start. No reasonable lawyer would have filed it." He excoriated Trump and his attorneys for recklessly advancing claims, which, quote, "the most basic legal research would have revealed were nonsense." He went on to say it was not that the complaint and amended complaint were inadequate in any respect. They were inadequate in nearly every respect. And he accused Trump's lawyers of misrepresenting and cherry-picking public documents, quote, "to support a false factual narrative in a, quote, deliberate attempt to harass the defendants," noting that, quote, "it happened too often to be accidental." Now, having a federal judge accuse a lawyer of filing a complaint which was, quote, completely frivolous, both factually and legally, in which was brought in bad faith for an improper purpose is humiliating. And one lawyer tweeted, quote, I just turned in my bar card, ain't no way I could recover. But Judge Middlebrooks went even further, calling out Trump and his lawyers for a, quote, continuing pattern of misuse of the courts, and noting that this lawsuit, quote, did not come close to stating a legal claim because that was never its intended purpose. Now, according to Judge Middlebrooks, the intended purpose of this lawsuit was to use the federal court as a political fundraising tool. Trump never expected to win and didn't care. He filed it so he could continue to raise money and scream about the so-called Russia hoax. And the same goes for his other frivolous lawsuits against the Pulitzer Prize Board, CNN, Twitter, and the New York Attorney General. The court describes a litigation playbook consisting of, quote, provocative and boastful rhetoric, political narratives from MAGA rallies, and attacks on political opponents and the news media. Trump showed a disregard for legal principles and precedent while attacking the courts as biased when he doesn't get his way. And most important, he raises a mountain of cash off the lawsuits and pays his lawyers with money donated to his political action committees, aka PACs. Now, PACs are fundraising vehicles for political candidates, which are theoretically separate from the campaign and largely exempt from campaign finance regulation. But the court noted that Trump's Save America PAC paid $9.7 million in legal fees for Trump and his allies since 2021, with $2 million going to Habba's firm. And Habba recently became a senior advisor to Mr. Trump's new MAGA Inc. super PAC. So the whole system feeds on itself. Trump files a frivolous lawsuit, sending out emails to his supporters begging for money to fund it. The lawyers head to friendly media outlets to hype up the case, which leads to more money being donated, which is then used to pay the lawyers, who file even more frivolous lawsuits, and on and on and on. It's like a virtuous cycle, except without the virtue part. And the legal system isn't really set up to handle this. And as Judge Middlebrooks angrily points out in his order, that's not what the courts are for. It's unethical for Trump's lawyers to use the federal docket to host political fundraisers. And it's an abuse by Trump himself, whom the judge describes as, quote, a prolific and sophisticated litigant who is repeatedly using the courts to seek revenge on political adversaries, and the mastermind of strategic abuse of the judicial process.
Our current libel laws are a sham and a disgrace.
So the court made Trump and his lawyer, Alina Habba, jointly liable for the millions of dollars in attorney's fees accrued by the defendants in this case. And that means that the defendants can seek the sanctions from any one of the particular parties. And then once they have recovered, then the offending plaintiffs can work out amongst themselves how they're going to contribute to each other. And you can bet, at least in the future, that every single person sued by Trump is going to flag this order for the presiding judge as proof that Trump is a vexatious litigant notorious for filing frivolous lawsuits. But in the meantime, Trump's attorneys from the Florida law firm of Weber, Crabb, and Wine appear to have gotten the message loud and clear. They represented the former president in a bizarre lawsuit filed in Florida state court against the New York Attorney General Letitia James. Trump had hoped to get a Florida judge to intervene in the New York state civil suit against him and his company, but the case was removed from Florida state court to federal court, where it landed on the desk of, you're not gonna believe this, Judge Middlebrooks. Just hours after the judge sanctioned Trump and Alina Habba, the Weber Crabb firm filed papers to voluntarily dismiss the suit against the New York AG. They did not, however, withdraw Trump's defamation lawsuit in Okeechobee County against the 19 members of the Pulitzer Prize Board, but, you know, baby steps. So maybe now Trump's lawyers will stay home for a little while, and maybe instead of lawyering badly, they should try learning a more ascertainable skill like cooking delicious home-cooked meals, which they could do with today's sponsor, HelloFresh. HelloFresh is a great way to eat delicious, fresh food while still being healthy. It's a great way to get back into a diet or just eat great food. In fact, HelloFresh has a whole variety of calorie-smart, carb-smart, pescatarian, and veggie options, and you can customize it however you like. HelloFresh delivers fresh, quality produce from the farm to your door in less than a week, so you can enjoy favorites like falafel power bowls, seared steak and potatoes with béarnaise sauce, or Southwest pork and bean burritos. Now, I'm a do-it-yourself person, and I have to say, I was initially pretty skeptical about HelloFresh. I'm a pretty good cook, so I didn't think that I needed the help, but I actually loved it. Even for an experienced cook, HelloFresh delivers new ingredients and recipes that I'd never try on my own. HelloFresh generally keeps everyone's favorite meals and then rotates in new ones all the time. In fact, I usually increase the size of my HelloFresh servings so I can enjoy leftovers for lunches as well. And of course, everything was delivered straight to my door, so I didn't have to do any shopping. The produce actually gets to you faster than a grocery store, so it arrives at peak freshness and flavor. And it's also super easy to save time. HelloFresh cuts out meal planning and prep, so the recipes only take 20 to 30 minutes to cook, literally less time to cook than it would normally take to do the shopping. And it's also incredibly sustainable. Since the ingredients are pre-portioned, there's less prep and less wasted food. And the packaging is almost entirely made from recyclable or already recycled content, and HelloFresh's carbon footprint is actually 25% lower than that of meals made from store-bought groceries. And of course, 72% cheaper than dining at at your average restaurant. So if you'd like to try HelloFresh, go to HelloFresh.com and use the code LegalEagle65 for 60% off plus free shipping. Yes, you can actually get 65% off plus free shipping by clicking on the link that's on screen or down in the description. So go to HelloFresh.com and use the code LegalEagle65 or just click on the link below. Plus, clicking on that link really helps out this channel. And after that, click on this playlist over here for more Legal Eagle, or I'll see you in court.